This episode is brought to you by two books, The Power of Well-Being by Clive Elliott and the book Conversations, How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time by yours truly, Ivan Farber. For more information, visit conversations.biz. Conversations is available on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations About Conversations. On this show, we talk with movers, shakers, and difference makers about the conversations they lead in the world. Our guests are business leaders, authors, speakers, podcasters, barristers, and more. And when I say barristers, I don't mean baristas, although I'm not really opposed to having baristas on the show. Today's guest is Clive Elliott. Clive is coming to us from Auckland, New Zealand, where he is a barrister, patent attorney, and arbitrator. He's a past president of the New Zealand Bar Association. He's named in the international who's who in his field. He's a Queen's Counsel lawyer, which means he's considered to be the best in the legal profession. Moreover, he's a writer and an artist by calling. He's a painter and a poet. You can see some of his photography on his website, cliveelliott.com. He's written books on poetry, photography, and a short story called A Cat's Tale, and it's spelled T-A-I-L instead of T-A-L-E. That intrigues me as well. He's a social commentator and TEDx speaker. The principal focus of our conversation today is on his new book, The Power of Well-Being. Please help me welcome to Conversations About Conversations, Clive Elliott. Clive, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you for the introduction.
My pleasure. I'd like to give you an opportunity to make an opening statement. And in this opening statement, I'd like you to talk about the conversation that you're leading in the world.
Yes, Ivan. Well, my conversation in brief is having a conversation about having civil discourse amongst ourselves instead of actually shouting at each other. And it's about listening to people and understanding their point of view so that we can communicate in a civil and informed way, and hopefully in a better way.
There's a lot of parts of our discourse that are not civil.
That's right. And I think what's happening today is there's too much people talking past each other too much instead of actually talking to each other and listening and being active listeners, and also trying to actually separate facts and opinions. And I think that's the big problem we have, is we don't actually understand the difference between the two.
I read your book, The Power of Well-Being.
Yes.
And to me, the central thesis is we need to change our society, and that our goals as a society should be on general well-being.
Yes.
Which you put forth as a new yardstick for humanity.
Yes.
Please elaborate on your thesis, if you would.
Well, my thesis is that everyone wants to be well and live a good life. And it's easy to say, well, well-being is a positive thing that we should all be striving for, but how do we achieve it? And so what I've looked at is, in a way, I've tried to assess the circumstances or the features of society that create ill-being, or that prevent us from leading a full life. And I've analyzed those and tried to understand how we can fix the faults so that we can live a better life and we can live a fulfilled life. In other words, we can feel that we've been prosperous, and not just physically, but mentally and psychologically, and that we can actually ensure that other people around us are also well and are living a good life.
Yeah, it struck me as I was reading how much of the ill-being that you document throughout the book. And you did a really good job. It reads to me, I know that you had a researcher help you. It reads to me a little bit like a sociology book. It is a commentary on our world and the ill-being parts of it. It's pretty thorough.
It is, yes. And I did have a researcher, and I tried to I try to look at what's wrong with society so that we can fix it, but also in doing so, what's right with society, because there's so much good and there's so much positivity in what we do. And particularly our two countries are liberal democracies, and they lead the world in their own way. So I really looked at a large leader of the free world and a small democracy to see actually how they're faring and how they create well-being for their citizens.
The subtitle is A Blueprint for Rebuilding the Social Fabric and Reimagining an Inclusive Society.
Yes.
I'd love for you to say more about the subtitle and how you came to it.
Well, I try to find something that encapsulated the broad theme. And social fabric is really what the book's about. It's about humanity and humanism. But at the same time, recognizing that the social fabric has frayed at the edges. We need to actually be cognizant of what's going wrong so we can make it better, because both our countries have problems. And it's important that we recognize those. And there are some examples in my book where well-known people have admitted to their failings so they can help others. And that's part of the process, is being honest about things and saying, well, look, there are some problems here, but look, we're trying to fix them. That's the important thing, rather than ignoring them.
I want to put a few of the schematics from your book up on the screen.
Yes.
For people to take a look at and have you walk us through it, because while reading it, I enjoyed it, but I had my own interpretation of it. But
yes.
Now I have the opportunity to get the author's interpretation of it.
Yes, I'm very happy to do that.
So Clive, here is your Wagon wheel of well-being.
Yes.
And I'd love for you to walk us through it.
Yes, well, I think you start at the beginning. You start at the nucleus of it, and that's about general well-being. And it's not just about well-being on its own, it's about general well-being, and that means for society as a whole. So but that incorporates individual well-being and societal well-being, and in fact, the well-being of our family and friends and wider community, and the people that live next door to us, so that we're all part of communities, almost like an onion, and we all have to look after each other. So that's really central to it. But you can see to the left and right of the nucleus is the reference to material well-being and a resilient economy. I think that this is really important, because when we talk about well-being, it costs money. Someone has to pay for it. My thesis is that you need a robust economy to pay for these things. So this is not some sort of communist or socialist theme to say, let's just put all our money in the pot and we can all do well. I'm very much in favor of having a resilient, strong, free market, because that's how you pay for well-being. So that's really important, and that's the sort of backbone of the wagon wheel. And then if you look at there's actually two parts to it. The bottom part is getting by, and the top part is getting ahead. And this is based on Maslow's theory that that it's important that you have warmth, you have safety and security, but we need more. And what I'm looking at is really the top part is the important part. That's about getting ahead, doing better, and actually prospering. But if we look at the getting by, it's really important to have a safe and secure home. And it's easy to say, well, I grew up in a loving family where there was no violence in the family, but lots of families don't have that privilege. There is a lot of violence in family and family violence. So having a safe and secure home is by no means something we can take for granted. But it's above the line that I'm really interested in. And I've got one item there at 10 o'clock, independence. And that's not the independence in the sense of the being independent as a country. It's about being independent of things like drug dependency, of violence, of political interference in your life. It's being able to express your thoughts freely. So that's really important in a free society. So this starts moving slightly into the political sphere, but the book is not about politics. It's about humanity. And social cohesion and connection is important in the sense that it's the same way that you and I are having a discussion about these types of things. it's through discussion that we create cohesion. And from that arises equity and trust. And equity is having basic equality or equality of opportunity for people in society. And the result of that will be trust. We will trust each other because we're living in a decent society where people actually do treat each other properly. And to achieve that, we need to participate in civic and political affairs. That's critical. And that's why democracy has to be nurtured as well, because if we're not participating at local level and at the state level or national level, we're going to land up in the hands of dictators who don't listen to us and just do what they want. So it's really, Ivan, in a way, it's an attempt to actually analyze what makes society tick and how we can make society whole again.
You mentioned not being in favor of communism.
Yes.
And the next chart I'm going to put up there is a return on investment in better social outcomes, which does talk a little bit about wealth redistribution. And
yes.
Of course, in the societies we both live in, there is some degree of wealth redistribution. I'd love to hear your interpretation of this chart.
Well, this chart was actually based on my interview with Sir Bill English, a former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who was known for, he was a religious man and a family man on the right. So he was from the National Party, but was nevertheless concerned about the fact that the lower 15% of the population are living in dire need of support. And he spoke to me about what he called the $1 million babies. And those are the babies who grow up in deprivation and are going to cost the rest of us $1 million each. And he said, if we could just invest a couple of $100,000 in those kids up front, we would all save $800,000 per baby. It was very much based on the view that we need to help the people in need. But there's a good economic benefit for that, because it means that we all save. Society saves money and it can allocate it to other needs. He said to me that there was an economist and an analyst who had done some work on this, and her name was Emily Mason. And he spoke about the Mason curve. And I interviewed Emily as well. And this is actually from her. She gave me permission to use it. And it's a very simple hypothesis, and it's based on actual research, that on the left-hand side, you can see the number of people that have the means, and on the right-hand side is people who don't have the means. So they're economically worse off. But you can see that in terms of their support needs, they go up very rapidly towards the end of the chart. If you look at it, it's almost like a mirror image. The people who earn the most have the lowest social needs. And the opposite applies, and it's the lower 15%. And Sir Bill's view was that if we could move some of those resources from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, we would actually cure a lot of our social ills. And it's a very simple proposition, but it makes sense. In fact, if we focused on the 5%, not the 15%, and allocated all of our efforts to them and got them back into society, we would all benefit from it.
Clive, we're going to take a brief commercial break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you to give us some of your tips on how to put your personal plan for well-being into action.
Okay.
To the listeners, as you know, this podcast is brought to you by the book Conversations, How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time, by yours truly, Ivan Farber. And I want to encourage you to go get the book. I'm going to encourage you by telling you what some of the people have written on Amazon reviews. This is one of the best self-help books I've ever read. It's a manual for someone who wants to optimize business and personal relationships through effective conversations. It's relevant for anyone who cares about improving their relationships one conversation at a time. If you want to improve your business and personal relationships, start reading this book today. And Clive, as a thank you for being on the show, I'm going to send you a copy of the book. And now back to our regularly scheduled conversation. So Clive, what are your tips for how an individual can create a personal action plan for well-being?
I think if you go to the back of my book, I've got a table which actually sets out a series of steps that we can take, and it's got resources that you can actually refer to. But I think the way to start this is with small steps, because in a way this deals with a huge topic. It deals with a number of dots that I try and join together, but we all have to start with something tangible. And by that I mean, I listened to an interview with a young woman earlier this week, and she said, my goal is to influence just one person and get them to actually embrace what I'm talking about and my views. And if I can do that, I'll be happy. And that's what I'd like to be able to do with this book, is just one by one, get people to read it and to do something positive. When I talk about that, what I'm talking about is actually engaging with society in a positive way, and engaging with your neighbors, engaging with the people you love, to make sure that they are well, and that they are actually embracing well-being in its broadest sense.
Our theses are similar in that I believe everything is created one conversation at a time. And it's true that well-being is also created one conversation, one interpersonal relationship at a time.
Yes.
That when we try to get larger, we can't get our hands around it. We can't actually do it. I mean, some of us have a bigger platform, but still, even on this platform here, it's a conversation with one listener where we can make a difference.
Yes. Yes, and I think it's important. I always try, when I'm in court, for example, and I'm talking to a judge, I always try and think of it as a conversation. Not that the judge is sitting on the bench and I'm standing in front of him or her. It's the same when you have an appellate court with 5 judges. Is talk to one judge at a time. Don't get concerned about the fact that there are 4 other judges bearing down on you, with angry looks because they don't like what you're saying. And I think that's the important thing. And I think the other point, Ivan, is that this book is very much about well-being. Is actually an old concept. It's not new. And the Greek philosophers, and before that, Confucius was talking about well-being and how we achieve that. So these are old concepts, but it's really the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century, which is so important. And I think we need to go back to the philosophers from the Enlightenment, because they said that we need to focus on facts. We need to be empirical about our thinking, and we need to understand the difference between facts and superstition. So I think that these are the really important things, that if we're able to talk to each other in a factual and respectful way, and to say, well, look, Ivan, I accept what you're saying, but that's your opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion, but I don't believe that's factually correct. If you're able to say that, you're able to have a civil conversation and hopefully influence each other in a positive way. So I agree with you. It's one conversation at a time.
I'm going to read a couple of quotes from your book, and I'd like you to respond. One quote that I wrote out was, a lot of people don't feel good about life right now. In the modern online world, we are bombarded with incessant information, so much so that we live in a permanent state of digital saturation and fatigue.
Yes, well, I think my next book is going to be about that, about disinformation. I think it's a huge threat to our way of life, because in this saturated digital world, it is very difficult to separate what is true and what is not. And when I say true, we all have our own truth, but I think we have to be able to analyze information to say that's actually factually correct, or factually reliable, or it's unreliable. And I think that because we are bombarded with so much information today, we simply don't have the time to actually check everything. And so we have to take things at face value. And the risk with that is that bad players can seed the market with information for their own purposes. And it means that a lot of people have been duped into doing things and thinking things that they wouldn't otherwise do.
We are stuck in a polarized society that is often the prevalent voice is led by ideology and ideologues.
Yeah.
And even just for you to make a statement as this common statement that this person is right, this person is left, is to lump together what is really a mosaic of all sorts of different points of view into 2 points of view, which
Yes.
then reinforces the polarization.
Exactly. I think the problem is that we pigeonhole people, we pigeonhole ideas, and we say, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" Instead of saying, "Are you an American? And what do you feel about this issue?" And it's the same in New Zealand, where we have polarization between the left and the right. And I think what's important is to focus on the middle. It is the swing voter. It's the person who has an independent view and votes both ways. It is important because they will vote for what is right, rather than saying, "Well, look, I've always voted left or right." And I think it's very sad when you look at dating sites in some countries and they say, "Well, what political party do you belong to?" And surely that should be irrelevant as to who you're going to get on with. And I think it's also political extremism and religious extremism are dragging the centre one way or the other. And I think we've really got to work hard to maintain and nurture the centre.
I'm someone who eschews being pigeonholed into left or right or Democrat or Republican, what have you. But I do have a theory about why we do wind up with two extremes or two ends of a spectrum. And there's an expression that goes that money is the mother's milk of politics.
Yeah.
And when you have two, then you have the ability to raise funds against the other, against the enemy.
Yes.
And so to me, it's money drives the polarization. And I don't have a solution for it, although you put forth a number of solutions. And I think your ultimate solution is the civil dialogue, is the civil conversation is the solution.
That's right, the civil conversation. And I think that there are solutions, and countries like Ireland have a great solution, because if there are big social issues that need to be dealt with, they create the Citizens' Assembly. And it is made up of people from all walks of life. They get expert advice on issues, and they then give a recommendation to Parliament on social issues. On any social issue, we should make sure that we are getting the voices of the people who are affected by it, rather than lobbyists and billionaires who are able to sway the political debate.
There's a quote from your book where you wrote, "We also have to shake off the deeply embedded paternalistic mindset that government knows best when it decides to implement its decisions."
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Well, why I say that is that a lot of the social issues that I'm talking about have to be dealt with at the local level. So there's family violence, substance abuse in the family, people are unemployed, kids are not going to school. All of those issues have to be dealt with at the local level. And it's no use government trying to impose a solution on that family or that community. They have to sort it out themselves. And we've got to give them the tools for that. We've got to keep government out of those areas. And even politicians have said to me, when they see 5 cars up the driveway, that is a sign that things are bad, and it's not going to get any better. All it's going to do is just exacerbate the problem. So we've got to keep government out of those sorts of problems, but help them with sufficient backup.
When you say 5 cars, are these 5 nice cars or 5 not very nice cars?
These are 5 cars from 5 different government agencies.
Ah, okay.
And they're all there to help, but what they're doing is actually making the situation worse.
You wrote on your website My goal as an artist is to try and capture a little piece of that magnificent natural beauty that exists around us and preserve it in a time capsule so others can ponder and experience the wonder before it evaporates into the endless sands of time, which is a very poetic statement. I encourage people to check out your website, cliveelliott.com, and take a look at your art. But what do you want people to know about your art?
Well, my art's it's very personal to me. I mean, I don't paint for a living, and that's good in a way. I just paint what I like, and I do sell my art. The painting behind me is one of mine, and I think what I like about it is that it's partly realistic, but at the background you can see that the mountains are not actually real mountains; they're diagonals, and so I like to just play around with ideas. The greatest compliment to me is to walk into someone's home and see one of my paintings. I don't mind if I've given it to them or they've bought it. It's just great because if they've taken the trouble of hanging it, they obviously get some satisfaction from it.
We've just scratched the surface about your book and your concept of general well-being. I'd like to give you an opportunity to make a closing statement. And as part of that statement, I'd like to ask you, what do you want people to do as a result of them hearing this conversation?
What I'd really like is for people to buy the book and read it, because I actually believe that there's a lot in there, and it can help people understand some of the things that are happening in society today and the world around us. And the people that have read it have said to me, it was really helpful to me, and thanks so much for writing it. But it does deal with difficult topics. But I'd like to encourage people to actually dive in and grapple with some of these problems, because they're the problems of our time. And I've tried in my own little way to try and make sense of what's happening. And I would really encourage people to buy the book and engage in the conversation, because these are big issues.
Is there anything else you want people to know about, or that you want to say in this conversation with me?
No, other than, Ivan, I really appreciate you reaching out to me and having this conversation, because I think, as we said, it's one conversation by conversation that we're going to change the world and make it a better place. And this is just about well-being is another embodiment of conversations, of human interaction, because at the end of the day, that's what counts as humanity. It's my little attempt to help that process.
Well, we throw a pebble in the pond and it ripples out, and or a butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world and there's a typhoon in another. My closing statement, Clive, is I want to encourage people to read your book. It's called The Power of Well-Being. It's available on Amazon. And I want to speak directly to the listeners of the show to encourage you to reach out to me. I want to connect with you. I'm building a community of people who are leading important conversations in the world and supporting each other in that endeavor. In other words, I'm leading a conversation about the important conversations in the world and enabling others to carry that further, people like Clive. Beyond that, Clive, my dream is to create Conversations University, where we actually teach people how to have conversations that are civil and important and impactful, because we do not explicitly teach that in schools, to my knowledge.
No.
To the listeners, I invite you to get involved in this endeavor. I appreciate your feedback and support. Of course, please like, subscribe, comment, send me a message. Let me know that you're a part of the conversation and want to be a part of it. And for a limited time, as an incentive, if you reach out to me directly, identify yourself as a loyal listener or watcher of the show, I'll email you a copy of my book, Conversations, as a thank you. You can direct message me or send me an email at ivan@conversations.biz. With that, Clive Elliott and everybody out there, thank you for being a part of this conversation about conversations.
That's great.